for Atlas Network, and I'm joined on this presentation by Dr. Parth Shah, the founder and president of the Center for Civil Society in India. The topic we will be discussing today, as you can see on the screen in front of you, is fundraising in times of crisis. And I hope as we begin that everyone on this call is safe and well. And although we live in quite uncertain times right now, hopefully this presentation will give you a little bit of reassurance that we're all going to make it through, and we hopefully will help you create a clear path to go forward. I want to start out by sharing some good news. And this good news is that even though we are in a time of what we would seem to be crisis, donors are still giving. And there was a study, it was done in America by donors who give through an organization called Fidelity Charitable. And what they found was that 79% of their donors said that they would give at the exact same level as they did the year previous. The other nice tidbit was that 25% of them said that they plan to even increase their giving. So what does this mean for all of us? Granted, it was a sample. It's not every donor in the world, but I think what we can take from it is that there still is an appetite for donors to give to good projects, especially projects that advance freedom, advance liberty, when we all have a sense that governments around the world are trying to encroach on our liberties. The other thing that I want to kind of really push in on is you're not alone. You are part of a network. Atlas Network serves as kind of an aggregator of all of the groups worldwide, and want you to know that you can always turn to your friends at Atlas Network, but also your peers on this call. If you have questions, if you need help, if you just want to throw ideas around, we are a network, and I think we are strong because of the network that we are in. And as we move through this, a few points to really emphasize and focus on is staying confident internally within your organization. I think it's very important for the development team to give off a sense of confidence, especially when there's uncertainty in the air. You don't want to be misleading, but it's not good for your program team and the team that is out trying to do the work that you raise the money for, if they have the sense that the money may be drying up and they may not have a job. And so really giving a air of, we're going to get through this, an air of confidence, and also that plays for the donors as well. You want donors to know that even though times have changed and everything seems chaotic around us, our organizations are working tirelessly to make the world more free and spread liberty more broadly. And it is very important to share that, to give off that vibe, so to speak, to your donors, so that they know that they can have the confidence. Because again, 79% are willing to give, and they want to give to organizations that they feel are confident in the work that they are doing. So what do you do in a time of crisis? What do you do when it's difficult to go out and reach new donors because you're uncertain? One, you can't get on a plane, you can't get in a car, you can't go see them. So how do you interact? And I would say the best thing that you could do is to really hone in on your current donors and cultivate them, because they are home alone, many of them, and they're bored. They want something to do. And believe it or not, if you're not checking in on them, someone else is. So it's vitally important that we are keeping in touch with our donors. We're sharing content with our donors. A few very simple things that can be done: email. Look at your email correspondence with your donors. What are you sending them? Are you sharing your best stories? Again, the donors are home now too. They're not at work, many of them. And so they're looking for more things to read and to occupy their time. Pick up the phone. Again, some donors, because they don't have the social interaction that they're used to, would love a phone call. Check in on them and see how they're doing. But when you do this, it's very important to be authentic and truly give off a sense that you do care about them. This is not just a slide in, hey, I'm gonna say, hi, how are you? Now, hey, could you give us some money? I mean, truly be authentic, because these are very nervous times for many people. And you know, the 79%, that does mean that there will be some of your donors that are impacted in a way that maybe they can't give the same as they could. So just be mindful when you approach them that you're doing so in a way that understands the situation and approaches them in a sensitive way. Another great tool is the use of virtual meetings. We're doing it now, and it's, you know, how awesome that we can have 85 people from around the world together on a Zoom call discussing fundraising. You know, we were very bummed out when we couldn't hold this live, but now that this is coming together, it's turned into a great thing. And be creative within your own teams. I mean, these meetings are great, but think of other ways, again, that you can interact and engage with your donors. You know, Zoom is an amazing tool. I never would have thought that I could see the original cast of Hamilton presenting on Zoom, and now airing all over the world on YouTube. So think of ways that you can utilize this, one, to share your content, but also to engage with your donors. Again, reach out to donors and say, look, I can't come and see you under the circumstances right now, but I would love to catch up face to face. Would you mind to do a Zoom call? And again, when we're looking at how can we make the best out of the situation, these meetings are a lot cheaper than getting on an airplane or, you know, going out to lunch. It's just dialing up and connecting with people. And at the end of the day, that is what you know, development is. It's making strong connections. The other thing, excuse me, is use your time wisely. Use this time when you are, you know, I like to say I'm on the road constantly, and being grounded has freed me up to do some of the tasks that have been in the works for a long time, but sort of get pushed back to the back burner because, you know, donor connection and reaching out to donors is the main focal point. But now that we have a little bit more time because we're not traveling, look at your database. Is your donor database up to date? Do you have all the correct email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses for your donors? If you don't, use this time to clean it up. Do more donor research. It takes time, especially to acquire new donors. And as you're looking to prospect and hopefully draw new donors into your organization, it takes months to work them through the process. And a big part of that is the research. So take this time to do research, and also review your budgets and look for cuts. You know, look for ways that you can save money. An example that we have used this year at Atlas, a few things that we have taken into account that have saved us a fair bit of money is decreased travel. We're not traveling, so that is money that we can save and hopefully spend somewhere else. Canceled events. Again, events cost money. A Zoom meeting is a lot cheaper, so we're saving money there. Some of these you may have to go depending on where the money came for the events. It may have come from a donor with the specific intent to host an event. So you may have to go back to that donor and talk to them and say, you know, obviously we are not allowed to host an in-person event. Would you mind if we reallocated this money for this? We believe it will have a great impact, and leave it up to the donor. I do suggest that you always, especially if it's money that was specifically for an event or specifically for something and you are going to change, I really strongly suggest that you talk to the donor, be very transparent about why you're changing it. They'll understand, especially in light of what we're dealing with, that they would most likely have no problem switching it up. The other is decreased operating costs. Many of us are working from home, and so we are saving on office supplies, parking, transportation costs. These are all things that as a development team, we can look at ways to save and help in this time of crisis. And let me just pause 1 second. I do want to make a note. We will open it up for questions at the end, but if you do have questions while we are going, feel free to type them in the chat, and we will try to get to as many at the end, but we will also open it up at the end. And why does this all matter? It matters because we need freedom now more than ever. We're seeing all over the world. I'm sure many of you can have firsthand stories from your countries on what you're dealing with, where governments are taking over. And, you know, now is the time for us to stand up and shout for freedom and liberty and spread it as far as we can, and to go to our donors with that message that now, more than ever, it is important that they continue to fund organizations like ours within this network that are fighting for individual liberty and fighting for people's freedoms. Because it's just natural in a time of crisis, people tend to turn to government to save them. And we need to be strong to stand up and not back down. Now, when you talk to your donors, don't forget, again, I think it's very smart, and the time is fine now. We're deep enough into this stay at home where many donors are used to the normal routine, the new normal, so to speak, but still be mindful. Many of them have taken a strong financial hit. And so just be mindful when you talk to them that, and understand that they may not be able to give as much as you want them to, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't ask. And that's where it goes. Continue to prospect for new donors, because again, this will end. And it would be very unfortunate if our groups just sat on our hands and didn't put in the work now, the busy work of research and prospecting and trying to figure out different ways to identify donors, so that when our economies open back up, when travel opens back up, when we begin to feel a sense of normalcy back again, that you will be ready and not have to play catch up. So I strongly urge, keep working. And Parth, I will turn it over to you to share a few words as well.
Thank you, Chad, for some very good, I think, pointers as well as reminders about what we need to do to stay focused in this time of crisis. I also wish everyone that you stay safe and stay negative, as they say in these days. As Chad said, we are all working from home, but given the crisis, we may need to reimagine or pivot the work that we are doing, and how to align that work to the sort of current situation that we are all facing somewhat differently in our different countries. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how one could reimagine the work and align that with the current crisis. One thing is clear to all of us across all the countries, that governments are expanding their powers. Some powers obviously are justifiable, but many rules and regulations are quite draconian. What we need to do is to sort of talk about what are the unintended and unseen consequences of these new rules and regulations that are being imposed, right? So broadly, talk about what stories can we tell, what data can we gather, right? And how do we make sure that the expanded powers of the government are seen as temporary first, and secondly, seen in a way that many of them are quite unnecessary. And this approach of thinking about what to do to emphasize the expansion of government powers can apply to any think tank, right? Irrespective of what issues or domains that you are working in. It just requires a little bit of rethinking around how to pivot the work that you are already doing into this direction. So whether you are working on issues of ease of doing business or regulation or individual liberty or even privacy, right? In all of those areas, you will find a way in which you can talk about the new powers the government acquired, and then what can be done to sort of emphasize and remind people of those powers. Whether you're working on the domain of education or health or technology, you'll be able to do the same thing, right? So irrespective of the think tank's focus on issues or domain, you can figure out how do we focus on the expanded powers of the government. And obviously, as when all this ends, we want government to retrench those powers, right? Get back to, in a sense, where the Leviathan was a bit earlier than the crisis, right? And I think here we need to think about what changes that need to be made in order to force governments to retrench these powers, right? And this I think is an important point to think about. There are some changes which are beneficial, right? We know there is some deregulation, in particular in the healthcare sector. Many of the new drugs and tests are being fast forwarded in terms of approval. Hopefully those processes and those methods of fast forwarding approvals can remain even after the crisis. It will be important for us to think about the changes which are good to keep, and what do we need to do to keep them and maybe adapt them to work better even in the normal times. One area I think that is also taking a very bad sort of hitting is international trade, open trade. We know that for most of our countries, it will be impossible to get the drugs, the medicines, and the health supplies that we need if you are going to dependent on home production. So I think there are ways in which we can look at the essential commodities in our countries, how supply chains are getting impacted because of this narrow closing down of the borders. And then we can see what arguments can we build to open up the trade, right? I think that's an important part of our own ongoing agenda in how to make the world peaceful and prosperous. Now, for some think tanks which are working closely with governments, I know there are a few in our network who do, right? They can think about what governments are trying to do today is to find ways to help specific sectors of the economy and particularly specific groups of the people, right? So governments are trying to figure out how to help these small and medium enterprises, how to help the minimum wage earners or daily wage earners, how to help particularly women entrepreneurs, right, and women groups. Maybe there are ways in your country that you can propose to government that will further this agenda and the need the government has. At the same time, it remains aligned to your values, the values of your think tank. Same is true about access to many goods and services in health, in food, some of the basic necessities that people need to have. Governments are trying to figure out how to make them affordable, accessible, and this could be a good place for us to also talk about reforms that can be done in these areas. So that's another important area for those think tanks that do work closely with government. I know that there's always a danger of proposing something and then what actually comes out at the end is very different than what you proposed. But that's the judgment that you would have to make. Right? Now, hopefully at some point, this is all will get over. Right? And we know that when it gets over, the general theme of praise will be all for the government. What governments have done, how quickly they acted, how they mobilize people and resources. Right? I think it will be important for us as champions of civil society to remind people that yes, government did do many things, but many more were also done by CSOs, by civil society organizations, non-profit as well as for-profit. I think it will be good to document what has been happening to civil society, what stories we can tell about the impact of the work that civil society has done, what data, if it's possible, to collect and present to public at the end of when all is this over, that what role others have played in handling this crisis. We also know that some parts of our economy are going to change fundamentally. Right? Just like what Chad talked about, we are doing this Asia Liberty Forum sitting in our own homes, which would have been quite unimaginable just a few months ago. Right? Even though technology was there, if somebody had come to us and proposed this idea, many of us would not have really thought very highly of the idea. And so we know that many changes are going to happen in our lives, in the businesses. And therefore, one can sort of try to foresee what those changes would be in our own countries. Right? Now, how can we help entrepreneurs to cope with those changes, to stay ahead of the curve if possible? Right? One can see many ways of doing that. One, foreseeing the regulatory challenges that the new lines of businesses, the new avenues are going to face. And maybe we can start talking about how to change those regulatory barriers that people are going to face. Right? We can also think about, and this could work for some of the think tanks which are far more active on the ground, of thinking about some kind of venture fund, startup fund that can help small entrepreneurs, right? To be able to think about a different line of work, a different market, a different approach, a different technology than what they have been doing so far. So this also gives a very positive, I think, engagement with the economy, with the entrepreneurs, in thinking about how we can foresee some of the changes which are going to happen and how we can help them to do well in the new times, the new shape of the economy that's going to emerge. So these are some of the ideas I want to share with you in terms of how we could, as think tank community, remind people about the expanded powers, how to restrain those powers, how to keep the changes which are important and will be beneficial to continue after the crisis is over. Thank you for listening, and stay safe and be negative. I think we are going to open up for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everybody. My name's Cameron Griffin. I'm the Donor Relations Manager for Atlas Network, and I'm going to be kind of running through some of the questions with you guys. I see that a lot of people have actually already put some questions in the chat, so I'm going to open those up to Chad and Parth now. You're also welcome to raise your hand. Chelsea and I will be monitoring those, and we'll call on you, and you'll have the floor at that moment. But for this time being, I'm going to go through and start at the top. You guys have had some pretty good conversations during the presentation, so I want to make sure that we highlight those and give Chad and Parth a chance to answer what's already been asked. So I think Reiner was one of the first ones, and he actually had a question kind of for the group as a whole, but I'm wondering if Parth has any information on this in terms of Asian think tanks. But are there already experiences by think tanks that their funding is drying up, or should we expect the effects to hit us a little bit later? Do either of you have any comments on that or want to add something?
I think we already have indications from some of our key donors and some of the bigger donors that they would be delayed in making keeping those commitments. They have not reneged on the commitments yet, but there's already a warning that we should expect the money to come much later than what used to be the case earlier. That also has given, frankly, a chance to talk to some of the other donors who know each other, right? By saying that, yes, this is a group, this person or this donor has a difficulty at this time. We hope that you are able to keep your commitment and make the grants as they have been scheduled. So I think having that conversation with the donors very openly has helped CCS in some of the key donors that we have. Some obviously have told us very clearly they would delay, but some have come forward, given that reality of delay by other donors, that we are going to come keep our commitment and give you the money as promised on time.
Yeah, and I think Parth is exactly right. And one of the key things he touched on was being very honest and transparent with the donors and having honest conversations. I think, you know, maybe they will fall off this year just because they just got hit so bad. I think, as Parth mentioned, some are, I say a vast majority right now are wait and see. Just uncertainty. There's just so much uncertainty in the markets. There's uncertainty in their businesses. They want to be able to, they may have the money, but it's too volatile right now. So let's let things settle down a little bit before we make any commitments. The other thing too is being mindful of the makeup of your donor base. I saw one comment, I think it was Greg Brooks, who is quite reliant on foundation funding. And it can be difficult if you are only reliant on one type of, whether it's only corporate money, only individual money, and I know it's different, many countries are different, so this does not possibly maybe work for everyone, but as diverse a portfolio of donors as you can have is helpful, especially in times of crisis, because it affects many in different ways. And in some ways, a lot of times foundations, if you have foundation money, they will be a little bit safer. They may cut back some of their giving, but very rarely will they wipe it out completely. What they tend to do is stop letting new people in and deal with the current recipients of their giving. But again, the most important is cultivate your donors, build true, strong relationships with them, that when you have times of crisis like this, you can pick up the phone and have an honest conversation about where your organization is, and they feel comfortable having an honest conversation back, telling you where they currently are. So again, you know, as we get through this, one of the key takeaways is always build the relationships, because development and fundraising really is all about the relationship, and the stronger the relationship, the more money you're going to get over the long run, and frankly, just better return all around.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chad and Parth. Chad, we've got a question for you, actually, and I see some of our partners in Nepal also agree with the statement. At this time, when the understanding of statism and the economy is rising, we should defend liberal values louder. I think we should remind the 1970s, especially the days when public spending was a huge burden on state budgets. What does Chad think about this?
I absolutely agree. And that was sort of to my point right now. Everyone turns for whatever reason. It's like everyone forgets what got them to their wealth, their prosperity. The moment a crisis hits, they give it all up and turn to government to save them. And you know, in a crisis, maybe, but guess what? The government's not going to give that power back, and they're just going to continue to take and continue to grow. And so, as I said, now is absolutely the time to be fighting back harder and going to your donors with that message of, this is the time for us to really be in the fight, and you can't do it alone. You can't do it for free. It takes funding, and that's where the onus is on our organizations to come up with a plan, a sound plan, present the plan as viable, capable, with a proven outcome, like if we do this, this is going to happen, and make a strong pitch to donors. But it's very important that you take the time to prepare and really focus in on what it is you want to tackle. I think it's easy for us just to say, we want to stop the growth of government. Okay, how? What are you going to do that's going to stop the growth? Because it'll probably take a lot more money to stop all of it. So looking at what can you do that will have the greatest impact, and then taking that idea to the donor for funding. Parth, I don't know if you have.
Yeah.
I think I completely agree that this is really a difficult time for us libertarians, classical liberals. Our values are under constant attack. And I think for many people who are sort of fair-minded, for them it seems reasonable to allow government to expand its powers to deal with the crisis. And I think that's why it's important for us not to oppose everything that government does, which I think sometimes is a reaction that I see from many of us. But I think being a little choosy about it, where you want to sort of put your energy and efforts behind opposing what government is doing, and where in some cases you may need to support what government has been doing. I think finding that balance is important to retain credibility and to be taken to have a seat at the discussion table. I know it's a very difficult balance to strike in many of our countries, because things are just going so far out that we are all very agitated and angry about what is happening. I think it's important to maintain credibility of the organization. And I fear that quite often in opposing everything the government does, we lose some of our best friends, right, who may not be as ideological, but they are very sympathetic to our broad thrust of what we do and what we propose and what we stand for. And I find that that difficulty is something that should be talked about within the team, having a lot of discussions within the team, as opposed to leaving things to the sort of management to decide on these issues. And obviously, as Chad mentioned, taking the donors in confidence and sharing with them where you feel that there is overstepping of the government and where we have a good argument to stand against what government is trying to do. Right? I think so. I agree with Chad that this is a very important time for us to think seriously. And as I said, reimagine some of the things, pivot from the work that we are doing in order to continue to focus on the values that we all cherish.
Absolutely. So I have a tougher question for both of you now. What would be your advice if a company is deciding to downsize their development team during this time? I know we've already discussed a lot of organizations are changing fundamentally, and some of them are taking a harder hit than others. So what would be some of your advice for the company as a whole and some of these employees?
Go ahead, Parth.
Let Chad go first.
Oh, I was going to let you go first. I assume they mean company being a partner in the movement and not like a development officer for Amazon. It's hard to say. Obviously, you have to look, again, that's where looking at budgets, and I would hate to say that anyone should be downsized or let go, but that's where the organization does have to look at the overall budget and see how it plays out. Now, I will say it's hard to do a lot of the great work that many of our partners do without money. And the way to get money is with a development team. And so I would say they are arguably some of the most valuable employees that an organization can have, because they are the ones that are tasked with bringing in the resources, again, so that the organization can do all of the great advocacy, research, media output that so many of our partners do. But without knowing more of the details, it's hard for me to say, yes, this makes sense, or this does not make sense. other than it's a case by case, but I do believe, and maybe it's just I'm protecting my own team, I don't know, that the development team should be one of the last to look at when downsizing in an organization. Parth, I don't know if you have something.
Let me, I think, talk about what CCS has been doing, and maybe that's a way of may give you some ideas about what you can do given your situation. I think we are all in a different sort of situations, and we have to figure out what's the best approach in our own unique situation. So as you know, CCS has a new CEO, Yatish Rajawat, who joined about more than 4 months ago. I am now a non-executive president of the organization. And one of the things that Yatish has done, quite, I think, with the confidence of the team, is we had 2 office spaces. We have let 1 office space go, because now we realize that much of the work can be done from home, and probably this trend that we have started will continue even after the crisis. And therefore, we may not need as much office space that we used to have earlier. So that certainly has been a very good saving and great thinking on the part of the new CEO of the CCS. The only person that we are hiring, frankly, is in the development team. So not only we are not retrenching it, but Yatish has decided that if we are going to hire, we need more resources and more support and more, I think, reimagination and new thinking, innovations in the fundraising than what we have done so far. And therefore, we need to bring some new blood, some new talent on the team. Right? We have not let anyone go. We did have freezing of salaries, and maybe some of the people are going to take some cuts possibly. But I think with that, we are quite confident that we can ride this crisis. And I'm hoping the similar kind of options are available that Chad also talked about in terms of where you are going to be able to cut costs, and those maybe use more imaginatively to ensure that your funding stays intact and hopefully it grows. To just give an example, for some of the think tanks which are working closely with, say, grassroots organizations or some of the poor families in the country, right? For example, CCS works with street vendors. We have worked with them for long years, right? We also work with budget private schools, the low-fee private schools. Both of these groups are pretty hardly hit, right? The street vendors have no income actually, because there is nothing they can sell on the street. People are not on the street, right? And therefore, there is a need to provide them immediate support to just keep the families intact. And I think if you can pivot a little bit in that direction, there's a lot of money people are willing to give to provide immediate relief. It's not so much for research, but for immediate relief. And maybe for some think tanks, it's an approach that one can think of that we can help the groups of people that we've been working with, maybe in terms of deregulation and regulatory changes, help them directly and maybe pivot a little bit in that direction, get new donors who will come on the table to support that activity. And maybe some of them would remain so your donors even after the crisis is over, even after the immediate need of support is over, because they would like what you are doing, they would believe in the larger cause that you have. So I see few organizations also able to pivot that work in that direction and then get new donors to support that immediate relief work. And hopefully that's one way also to cover your overhead expenses, because you are continue doing more work.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for answering that question. I know it was a tough one. We're at the 5-minute mark. We've got 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one more question, but I wanted to remind you guys that these guys' contact information is on this slide. So like Chad said, like before, we're a network. We are willing to help out. We want to talk to you about your problems. If you're having issues, you want to ask us questions, feel free to. I know Parth and Chad would be more than happy to help out if you don't get your question answered during this session. We're more than happy to hear you out afterwards. But we've got one more question that I'm going to ask. I think this is a really good one. I think it can relate to everyone in this meeting, but how can think tanks in the Atlas Network collaborate to jointly study problems and address issues, like the impact of COVID-19 in their respective countries, so as to come out with policy suggestions for best practices that could be implemented across countries? Can such collaborations like these be used to approach international donors?
Parth, do you want to take the part on collaboration? I don't know if you guys do. I'm happy to talk
Sure.
about.
Yep. Actually, just earlier this week, CCS and the Student for Liberty South Asia organized a 2-day sort of virtual conference where we talked about what's going on in India, Pakistan, and the South Asian countries, Bangladesh, Nepal and Sri Lanka. And I think it became quite obvious that there are quite a few areas where our countries are acting in a very similar ways. And maybe there are arguments that we can build with examples from each other's countries, right? To make a case in our own country to why this way of approach, this particular regulation or a control the government has imposed does not really make sense, right? And I think at that time, it occurred to us just among the South Asian countries that this could be a good opportunity for us to network, find some common ground. And there are, of course, many common grounds already exist, given what the approach most governments have taken to deal with the crisis. And I think that certainly is an important area. I don't know how much we can do in terms of proposing new practices for the government, because that requires a lot more contextualization. It may, some particular rule or regulation may be better in, say, Sri Lanka, but may not be so well suited for India. What I think we can do is to look at the negative consequences of some of the commonly implemented ideas and rules. And that could be a good way to sort of build a larger argument against the expansion of government powers. And hopefully, as we proceed further, to retrench to how to get these powers away from government when the crisis is over. So I do see a great potential there for international collaboration, particularly among groups of countries which are similarly situated. It would be difficult to find too much common ground between US and India in many areas. But obviously I can see that among developing countries, there will be a lot of common ground, particularly in terms of lives and livelihoods. Discussion that we had, do we protect lives or do we protect livelihoods? And that's an important debate in some parts of the world, even though it's not so critical in other parts of the world. And I think that does require some thinking on our part. I do see as a great opportunity for us as a new avenue of work. And as somebody pointed out in the question, also a new set of donors to support that work.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take one last question from, I see Stephanie's got her hand raised. So we're going to let her go ahead and have the floor. And then absolutely, you guys can take this to Discord. But Stephanie, I've unmuted you, so go ahead.
You hear me and you can't see me, right?
Absolutely. We'd love to see you though.
I'm in my pajamas, everyone. Hi, everyone. I haven't missed a Asia Liberty Forum in a really long time. So at the last minute, I decided to sign up to join it. But I was just thinking of two things I wanted to let you know. I work for Donors Trust, which just started giving internationally. And one of our Asian partners just received a sizable grant from us this week. We have a special COVID fund. So if you go to donorstrust.org, you can find out how to apply for funding for any special projects you might be doing at this time. And you can actually find out more if you go to donorstrust.org. And then I can put, if you reach out to me, I could put you in touch with my coworker, Gordon Cummings, who is taking the lead on this project. I wanted to let you know about that. The second thing I just wanted to mention that I've had a lot of donors say to me in the past is that sometimes when they can't give money, their grantees forget about them and they only look to them when they can give them money. So I think it's something that we should all remember is that there's times when people can give money and when they can't, but it's always good to remember we're all in this together. And this year might be tough for some people, but 2 years down the road, it might be something different. And we're not just always in this because somebody's a donor, everyone becomes our friends. And many of these people on this Zoom are my friends, which is nice. So that is my little two
That
cents.
is, thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
hi.
Stephanie. I'm sure that's really good information for everyone on this call.
Great advice. And again, it just goes to the cultivation, and Stephanie is exactly right. It's not just about money. It is building true relationships, because, things happen. We are up to the clock. I wanted to, before we sign off, I know Chelsea had been putting it in the chats, but I just wanted to make two quick announcements. Our next sessions will begin at 12:30. Your options are Liberating Trade in Asia and a session with Atlas Network President Matt Warner and Atlas Network CEO Brad Lips, who are speaking about why all evidence suggests think tanks are an undervalued resource. Also, don't want you to forget to engage with us on the Atlas Network Discord community. You can refer to the chat box for the link. I believe Chelsea put it up, but I believe it was also emailed to you. And as Cam said, please feel free to reach out to myself or Parth with any questions. Sorry we did not get to everyone, but really glad you took the time to join us, and hope to see you all in person very soon. Thank you.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in the next session.